This is Abelard Giza. You could say that he is the sort of godfather of Polish stand-up comedy. In 2012, on the second channel of Polish Public TV, he told this joke.
Co robi papież, to pokazuje tylko, że facet jest zwykłym facetem, tak? Że papież to jest zwykły facet. Jakby, że ma, nie wiem, swoje wady, zalety, że ma fajną funkcję, spoko, ale to jest zwykły człowiek. On, nie wiem, puści bąka. Nie! Papież! No tak, normalnie zjada, przełyka, trawi. To nie zabierają tego anioły? Nie, to jest zwykły facet, wiecie, on...
Joke wasn't appreciated by Council Against Atheization of Poland, of Polish Parliament, and yes, we had something like that back then, so they issued an official complaint to country Council of Radio and Television, basically our FCC. It resulted in an official apology issued by the TV station and fine of 5,000 Polish zloty, about $1,200. Abelard also faced cancellation of some of his shows because of that. And those fine young gentlemen are Vulgar Impro about fucking, a very, impromptu, informal group that put out a show of the same name in January this year. Unfortunately, it sparked quite a controversy, mostly because of the description of the event on ticket sites and Facebook. Description mentioned jokes about rape. Let me read you one of the comments. I'm shocked that you organized such an event. It's the fall of humanity. Propagating rape and racism? I hope that authorities will take care of that. There was another interesting comment, but it got deleted by the club in which the event took place. I can't say that I blame them. Basically, it encouraged everyone to document the whole affair and collect evidence. Besides the fact that the show was not propagating anything, it made me wonder, what kind of authorities should take action? And what should they do? What kind of evidence one should gather and exactly to what end? But then I remembered that the history of stand-up comedy is full of examples of arrests, court cases, and even jail time for comedian caused by jokes. From United States in 60s and 70s all the way to today's India and Russia, but also Canada and Spain. Let me take you on a small journey that will show you that something so abstract and elusive like a joke can cause very real and grounded consequences. My name is Krzysztof Sawczuk, and this is Stand Up Teka.
You know the seven, don't you?
Who are these people?
The world is like a ride.
Oh, it's brutal!
From the godfather of Polish stand-up comedy to the godfather of stand-up as a whole. We cannot start nowhere else. This is Lenny Bruce. Many points at him when it comes to shaping this form of comedy in its modern version. Less emphasis on short, simple jokes and more on longer, personal stories. Social commentary, also in sensitive areas like race, religion or sex. Finally, wider means of expression, including profanities and swearing. Thanks to Bruce, among others, stand-up came a long way from clean, family-friendly entertainment, often on TV, to counterculture art form, often interested in important political and cultural changes. Lenny had his fair share of encounters with the law, but in this material I will omit drag possession and extortion cases. Instead I will focus on charges related directly to his stand-up routines. But even with that caveat, there is a lot to talk about. Like I've said, type of comedy that Bruce presented had dubbed him the most shocking comedian in the country, which on the one hand led him to the legendary Carnegie Hall, but on the other made him a person of interest to the authorities. In 1961, Lenny was arrested after a show at the Jazz Workshop Club in San Francisco. He was accused of obscenity based on California Penal Code. Two phrases were crucial: cocksucker and to come in sexual context. His lawyer was Albert Bentley, the First Amendment and free speech specialist. After listening to recordings of the show and testimony from Bruce himself and literary critics, the jury decided to acquit the comedian. In the next year, he will be arrested the next two times on the same charges, after shows in Troubadour in West Hollywood and Unicorn Club in Los Angeles. The word that sparked controversy this time came straight from the Yiddish language. Bruce himself was of Jewish descent. Schmuck, which can be used to describe penis in somewhat vulgar way, but also means somebody is stupid, useless or annoying. In both cases, the comic was acquitted. Less fortunate for him was gig in Chicago in '62, when during the show in Gate of Horn Club, police arrested him directly on the stage. Among the crowd was young George Carlin, age 25 at the time, who was even taken to the same paddy wagon after declining to present an ID.
And then suddenly this policeman stood up, and I believe he actually said the words, "Okay folks, the show is over," which of course is a cliche that policemen use just at a killing, you know, in a bar. When the crowd is getting, they want to break up the crowd. Okay, the show's over, the show's over. He actually said it in context. They began to check people's IDs, and they had the people leave the club through the only door, the upstairs only door, one by one show their ID, because basically what they wanted to do was to catch someone underage so they could give the club trouble. So when I got to the door and the police was there, ID, you want to see your ID? I said, I don't believe in ID. You know, just a smart-ass Irish guy, a little drunk, who didn't like authority anyway, you know, and didn't really care much for regulations my whole life. So I always give him some shit, you know.
We'll get back to Carlin later. Case based on Illinois Penal Code, section about obscenity, focused on bits about the meeting of psychotic rapist and nymphomaniac, alleged intimate relations between comedian and 3 married women, and making motions indicating masturbation on stage. The court sentenced Bruce to a year in prison. But he made an appeal to the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois and was released on bail until the next hearing. The trial took 2 years. Lenny was represented by another lawyer by that time, law professor and First Amendment specialist Harry Calvin Jr. Supreme Court acquitted Bruce and stated that the major portion of the performance before an adult nightclub audience related to social problems, and most of the objectionable passages were integral parts of the protected by free speech rights material. But by that time, comedian was involved in another court case, as it turned out the biggest of his career, and one that conclusion he won't live to see. But before we get to that, let's take a look at another case, one that is much more contemporary and one that had some media spotlight last year. This is Munawar Faruqui, rising star of stand-up comedy in India. Hard work and unquestionable talent made him quite popular. His videos on YouTube reach millions of people. But his name appeared in the headlines of news outlets around the world when he was arrested for jokes that he didn't tell. Just before Munawar's New Year's show on 1st of January 2021, to the stage in the city of Indo burst in Enclava Singh Gaur, son of the mayor of the city, connected to ruling political party of India, Bharatiya Janata Party. Enclava is also a leader of Hind Rakshak Sangathan, a religious quasi-militia. He accused the comedian of making fun of Hindu gods in his act. Munawar, who is a Muslim, which plays some role in the whole affair, explained that he didn't intend to offend nobody and is willing to apologize if that was the case. As it seemed, gentlemen reached some kind of understanding and the thing was taken care of. However, the very next day, Munawar, along 4 other comedians, were arrested. Enclava was the one to file a complaint. Police activity was based on his deposition. One can wonder, why the delay? Why don't you arrest comedians after the show the same day? You see, there wasn't any mention of any gods in Munawar's act that night. At first, Enclava claimed that he overheard jokes on this topic during the rehearsal before the show, but anyone that has any larger contact with stand-up comedy will assure you that there is no such a thing as a rehearsal before the show. There could be a sound check and maybe a light check and that's it. Nobody will perform his jokes to an empty room. That's insane. Comedians know their material by heart. There is no such a thing as dress rehearsal known from the theater. As the time went by, the outraged mob changed their story. Now, Munawar supposedly offended the gods in his YouTube video that was published in April of 2020, 8 months back. Sorry for the quality of the video, but Munawar deleted it from his channel and that's the only copy that I could find. Shout out for translation to Ravi Kumar. This is, as far as I know, the only English translation of this bit on the internet.
पिया घर आया ओ राम जी लाइक अगर भगवान को रिस्पॉन्स करें वो गाना कैसा है ना लाइक मेरा पिया घर आया ओ राम जी डोंट गिव फक अबाउट योर पिया मेरा पिया घर आया राम जी लाइक मैं 14 साल से खुद घर नहीं गया एंड अगर सीता ने सुन लिया तो वो तो डाउट करेगी कि इफ योर हस्बैंड इज व्हाई यू आर अपडेटिंग माय हस्बैंड बिच एंड सीता को तो माधुरी पे पहले से शक है वो गाना है तेरा करूं गिन गिन तो उसको लगा वनवास गिन रही है कि साल 14 पे रुक गई है.
Comedian faced 5 charges from India Penal Code, including deliberately intending to outrage religious feelings and disobedience to order of the police. The maximum sentence for these offenses was 4 years in prison. Munawar applied for bail, but one court after another declined his request. Finally, the highest instance, Supreme Court of India, granted him bail and pointed out the vague nature of accusations and procedural errors before and during the arrest. Munawar left jail on 7th of February. he was imprisoned for 37 days. But that wasn't the end of his troubles. Arrest warrants were issued in some states of India. In others, comedian was banned from the stage. And even in those that allowed him to perform, clubs received so many threats that police commanded them to cancel shows, because security of the audience couldn't be assured. When, in the span of 2 months, Munawar was forced to cancel more than a dozen of fully sold-out shows, he issued a statement on his social media. He wrote that hate has won and that he will retire from performing. Since then, he tried to come back on the stage more than a couple of times, but his name was erased from the lineups of many comedy festivals. The rise of religious fundamentalism and nationalism in India manifests itself also in larger interest of authorities in the work of comedians. Kiku Sharda spent 14 days in jail for lampooning the guru of Dera Sachasoda religious sect. Comedian Agrima Joshua received threats of death and rape after jokes about Shivaji, an important Hindu historical figure. Minister of Internal Affairs Anil Deshmukh ordered police to take legal actions against comedian. Even the most famous Indian comedian in the world, Veer Das, didn't avoid clashing with authorities after uploading to YouTube the video "I Came From to India." Nearly a 7-minute segment of his performance at Kennedy Center in Washington dealt with divisions and contradictions that are painfully apparent in modern India. Offended critics, as always, cherry-picked the most juicy parts. I would love to show you more than them, but Veer's publisher really don't want me to, so I will just quote some of his remarks. I come from an India when we worship women during the day and gang rape them at night. I come from an India where we laugh so loud in the comfort of our own homes that you can hear us through the walls. And yet I come from an India where we break down the walls of comedy club because you can hear the laughter inside. I come from an India where old leaders will not stop talking about their dead fathers and young leaders will not stop following their living mothers. The wave of outrage included press officer of ruling party Aditya Nath Jha, who filed a complaint to the police accusing Das of vilifying the nation on foreign soil. A similar complaint was filed by the secretary of party in Mumbai, Vivekanand Gupta, because, in his words, comedian hurt the feelings of nationalists. Veer was also banned from performing in one of the biggest states of India. But there were also voices of support for comedian, even among the politicians, which in some ironic way confirmed his words about deep divisions in society and the existence of two Indias. In the podcast The Good One, Das said that he will continue to bring up subjects of religion and politics in his act, even more than so far, and is almost sure that he will also be arrested in the future, arrested for jokes. But insulting the whole nation will make you arrested not only in India. This is Idrak Mirzalizade, comedian born in Azerbaijan with Belarusian passport that performed mostly in Russia. He's a part of the stand-up comedy boom in this country over the last couple of years. On the 1st of March 2021, on the internet talk show Razgony, he told this story. Shout out to Szymska Baciński and Agata Janicka for translation. Once again, I don't think you will find those bits in English anywhere else.
Я решил снять новое жилье, необходимость возникла, и я столкнулся с обычной проблемой любого нерусского человека, который хочет найти себе жилье. Точнее, в голове.
Idrak speaks about issues that people of non-Slavic descent face while looking for accommodation, which is apparently an ongoing problem in Russia.
И я звоню риэлторам и всегда понимаю, что мне нужно, с определенной стратегией звонить. У меня есть стратегия, как сделать так, чтобы жилье мне досталось. Во-первых, первый пункт плана – это сказать как можно больше слов по телефону до имени, чтобы риэлтор запомнил, что я говорю без акцента. Ему это нужно запомнить, потому что если я сразу скажу имя, акцент он дорисует по-любому. Если я скажу «Здравствуйте, меня зовут Идрак», он дальше услышит «Хочу квартиру».
Можно я доскажу грубую часть этого захода вообще? До этого все было хорошо, все хорошо. Вот этот шовинизм с бабушкой. Потом я выхожу, и я матрас с братом выкидываю, который тоже не русский.
Матрас?
Матрас очень даже русский. Я его выбрасываю, он весь в говне. Ладно, не нужно было говорить.
Я видел матрас действительно в говне.
Матрас весь в говне. Просто, я не знаю, если что, предыдущие съемщики русские, и, видимо, русские обмазываются говном и ложатся спать.
Нет, но матрас выглядел так. Матрас, честно говоря, как будто, знаешь, как когда у тебя заканчивается туалетная бумага, и ты такой, так, воспользуюсь салфетками. Но, возможно, когда-то заканчивается вообще все. Я такой, воспользуюсь матрасом и съеду из этой квартиры.
Ты думаешь, они как собаки вот так вот?
Нет, я думал, взял матрас, пошел с ним в туалет, посидел.
И в общем, мы выкидываем этот матрас, по лестничной клетке спускаем, и тут чувак заходит в подъезд, мужик, и мы его решили пропустить, потому что он явно быстрее пройдет, чем мы с матрасом вниз спустимся. Это отличная концовка этой истории, потому что он осмотрел нас, он должен, как по-моему, он должен быстрее пройти и сказать спасибо, что пропустили, правильно? Или просто пройти и вообще ничего не сказать, пофиг. А он увидел нас, осмотрел также с ног до головы и просто медленнее стал идти. Понимаешь это? Понимаешь момент? Он типа показывает, я тут главный хозяин. И меня это жестко выводит. Я такой, ну ладно, я новый жилец, вообще не буду ничего ему говорить. Но меня это жестко раздражает, потому что, а с какой стати ты на нас так смотришь? Я понимаю, французы великая нация. Типа, великая нация. Могут позволить себе быть националистами. Плохо быть националистами, но они могут позволить себе это. А это кто? Я понимаю, если бы это был Достоевский, прошел мимо меня так, и я такой, блин, он написал «Преступление и наказание», может на меня так смотреть. Это какой-то русский Павел с какой-то стати смотрит на меня с презрением. Ты понимаешь, да, мою претензию?
Да.
Спасибо, Тимур.
I wouldn't say that this is the pinnacle of comedy, but remember that this is mostly improvised show and it's only a small part of an almost 50-minute long episode. So nobody really cared and everyone forgot about this story and jokes. That was until 3 months later, on the website of conservative religious TV station Tsargard TV, appeared an article that described those jokes as insulting to Russian nation and called for deportation of comedian. Story was picked up by Vladimir Soloviev, let's call him political commentator, that is one of many propagandists of Vladimir Putin and the whole state administration. He showed on air only a small portion of what you just saw and accused Idrak of spreading hatred of Russian nation. He appealed to authorities to take care of the problem. That kind of publicity caused flooding of comedians' social media with hate and death threats. There was supposedly even bounty on his head, about $700 at the time. In the city of Penza, there was one-person protest with a sign with photo of comedian and inscription "Enemy of Russian Nation." Idrak was also assaulted on the street of Moscow by 2 men who demanded apologies from him. The comedian tried to explain the whole situation during his shows, showing how absurd the accusation was. After all, his whole audience was Russian. At the end of July, the district attorney of Moscow charged Idrak with a misdemeanor that was inciting hatred and hostility and humiliation of human dignity. This wasn't an isolated incident of authorities taking great interest in the work of stand-up comedians in Russia. Politically charged investigations with police officers in the crowd during performances, but also with visits in houses of family members, were initiated also against comedians such as Denis Chujoy or Kirill Svetlov. But the case of Idrak is without a doubt the most notorious. On the night of August, court of Tangast district in Moscow sentenced comedian to 10 days in prison. As a base for the ruling, court used only small portions of the show that were making rounds on social media. Idrak once again assured that his jokes weren't targeted at nobody, that he merely made fun of xenophobia. He apologized to anyone that felt offended. 4 days later, comedians from Russian stand-up comedy scene released a video in support of Idrak and condemning jail punishment for jokes, which was, as they put it, a dangerous precedent. They also organized a special show in Moscow under the title "Joke is not a crime." When the comedian left prison, he needed some rest, which is understandable, so he flew to Turkey. There, he received news that Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs announced that from end of August 2021, Idrak Mirzalizade is persona non grata and is prohibited from entering and staying on territory of Russian Federation for life. Later, court in Moscow mandated ministry to set new, more reasonable time frame of a ban. At this point, there is still no decision in this case. Comedian is filing one appeal after another. In the meantime, he sold a picture of his residence card as an NFT for about $30,000. When a case like that appears in the media worldwide, there is almost always one name that is mentioned. This is, of course, George Carlin. About a decade after he was arrested on one of Lenny Bruce's show, he himself was one of the stars of Summerfest in Milwaukee in July of '72. The festival itself was a disaster due to the awful weather and many cancellations of performances. The audience was furious and threw at the musicians mud and anything else that got in their hands. The press called it Bummerfest. Still, there was almost 35,000 people in the crowd. Carlin's shows started with a bottle of wine that somebody threw onto the stage. It didn't break, so the comedian took a large sip from it. That bought him a little bit of good faith from the crowd. About halfway into the show, George started his signature bit, 7 words you can't say on television. Unfortunately, this part of the performance wasn't taped, but Carlin recorded this bit many times. Original take can be found on album Class Clown from '72.
Yeah, there are 400,000 words in the English language, and there are 7 of them you can't say on television. What a ratio that is. They must really be bad. No bad words, bad thoughts, bad intentions, and words. You know the 7, don't you, that you can't say on television? Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits, huh?
And then...
Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits.
Of course, with time, bit itself and the list has grown quite a bit. On the stage at Summerfest, comedian repeated his litany twice, which was just too much for Elmer Lance, an off-duty cop who was in the audience with his family, wife and 9-year-old son. Some witness said that Elmer stood up and shouted, "Who does that son of a bitch think he is?" using language like that. But I won't vouch for the authenticity of this quote, only one source claimed that. What was confirmed was that Lance went to the telephone booth and called police station. He asked for some backup on the festival grounds. Reinforcements were there before the end of Carlin's show. His wife told him about the police when she pretended to bring him some water on stage. So George prolonged his set for another half hour. Finally, he said goodnight and left the stage during thunderous applause and started to circling on the backstage. Not to avoid arrest, mind you, but to throw out a bag of cocaine that he had in his pocket. Eventually, he was apprehended. The moment of escorting Carlin from the festival grounds was immortalized in this legendary photo. Next day, it will be the cover of many newspapers in the area. The comedian was taken to the station and after a couple of hours in custody, he was released on bail of $150. There is even a short interview from that day, straight from the station.
I didn't know there were, but it wouldn't have changed anything I did if I had known there were children in the audience. In fact, I think children need to hear those words the most because as yet they don't have the hang-ups. It's adults who are locked into certain, thought patterns. So as I say, the idea of the material is to show the 7 words you can't say on television. Out of 400,000 words in the English language, there are 7 that right now I can't say to you that you couldn't run on the air, and yet they're merely words. And so I use them in explaining that and in making fun of that ironic situation. And so I find it kind of funny to be hassled for using them when my intention is to free us from hassling people for using them.
Carlin refused to apologize. The whole affair became great publicity for himself, his shows and albums. District attorneys from the state of Wisconsin and Milwaukee County refused to press charges. Only the city attorney decided to do so. Disorderly conduct was the charge. The trial was postponed many times. Finally, it took place in December. Carlin didn't show up, but he sent his album Class Clown as evidence. Both the prosecutor and the defense agreed that the beat on the record is almost identical to this from the Summerfest performance. The record was played in the courtroom and people laughed, including Judge Raymond Geringer, who chuckled and then said that if there were no incidents in the audience and the atmosphere on the festival grounds was good, then there was no disorderly conduct. There is no crime, the comedian was innocent. This wasn't the end of the career of the 7 words in the legal system, but I will leave that one to George himself.
Class Clown had the 7 dirty words, 7 words you can never say on television. I never called them dirty. LA Times started that. The 3rd album was called Occupation Fool, and I had an extension of the 7 words you can never say called Filthy Words, and I added things. That piece of material, Filthy Words, was played on the radio in New York City on a listener-supported station. It was WBAI in New York. That was played on a show called Lunch Pail. It was on in the afternoon, and the announcer specifically gave warnings, a couple of warnings, that we're going to play something from an album by George Carlin that has a language you may find objectionable or offensive. and we'll warn you when we play it. If you don't want to hear this sort of thing, tune it out at that time. So they played it, they warned, and then they played it. And there was a professional moralist in the audience, someone in his car with his son who was in his teens. This man was, I don't think he was a minister, but he was part of something I think called Morals in Media, a self-appointed guardian of the public's morals, who listened to the entire piece with his son. And apparently he did not feel the son was morally corrupted by this, nor did he feel he was morally corrupted. Just other people might be morally corrupted, and his job was to protect them. So he made a complaint to the FCC, the only complaint they got. They sanctioned the station. The FCC gave them a $100 fine, and they put a mark in your folder for when you have your license renewed, you have a bad mark against you. The station refused the sanction, refused the $100 fine, and they went to district court. And the district court was in Washington, D.C., and 2-1, the station won the case. Freedom of speech was upheld. The FCC then went to the Supreme Court with the case. And in 5 years after they played it, it was played in 1973, 5 years after they played it, the Nixon court decided 5-4 that it was indecent. They had found a new category of bad language because it wasn't obscene. It didn't meet the test for obscenity. It wasn't obscene. But it was indecent. They made that up. And that's now a standard. And that was my contribution. I'm just very pleased in a perverse way to be included somewhere in this this American adventure, in the annals of the legal profession. There is on communications law, there is this footnote called the 7 words you can never say on television. I don't know that any other comedian, a routine by any other comedian has wound up in that position, which makes me, as I say, it's a perverse sort of pride.
So, all of that must mean that court cases against comedians, against jokes, ended in so-called West about 50 years ago, right? Well, not quite. This is Mike Ward, Canadian comedian who in his special from 2013, S'Exposer, had this bit.
Moi, Céline, elle m'impressionne pour une chose, elle chantait pour le pape. Elle chantait pour le pape quand elle était petite. Il n'y a aucun autre... Ben oui, il y a un autre enfant québécois qui a chanté pour le pape. C'est le petit Jérémy. Je sais pas si vous vous rappelez, tu sais, le petit, là, qui avait comme un subwoofer sur la tête. Là, lui, t'es écœurant. T'allais à côté, tu vas entendre les commandes à l'auto du IW. C'est écœurant. Puis il était un petit peu moins bon que Céline. On se le cachera pas, là. Il avait une voix un petit peu moins mielleuse, là. Il est arrivé, puis il a fait comme un papa, mais il faisait de son mieux. Puis moi, je me rappelle, au début, tout le monde voulait le comparer à Céline. Au début, il est arrivé, tout le monde l'insultait, j'étais le seul à le défendre. Il arrive, il chante pour Céline, pour le pape, puis tout le monde a fait comme, il est bien poche, lui. Chris, il est poche, il fausse, il chante mal, il est mauvais. Puis c'est comme, asti, il vit un rêve. Il est mourant, puis il vit un rêve. Laisse-le vivre son rêve. Son rêve, depuis qu'il est petit, c'était de fausser devant le pape. Et là, il est en train de le réaliser à merveille. Laisse-le vivre son rêve. Après...
The petite Jeremy that Mike is talking about is Jeremy Gabriel, now a grown-up man. When the special was released, he was 17, but he had his 5 minutes of fame a couple years before, when he mesmerized Canadians with his voice. Just like you heard, he performed for the Pope, met Celine Dion, and even published an autobiography. Jeremy suffers from Treacher-Collins syndrome, a disease that causes skull deformation and loss of hearing. From age 6, he uses a special implant that allows him to hear.
Après ça, il a chanté pour Céline à Vegas. Même monde, en fait, asti qui est poche. Il est poche, il fausse, il chante mal. J'étais comme Chris, il est mourant. Il vit un rêve, laisse-le vivre son rêve. Asti, c'est un enfant mourant qui vit un rêve, laisse-le vivre son rêve. Il a chanté pour les Canadiens. Hein, il avait scrappé l'hymne national. Et là, le monde, en fait, asti qui est poche. Il fausse, il chante mal. J'étais comme Chris, il est mourant. Il vit un rêve. Arrêtez de l'insulter. Il vit un rêve, laissez-le vivre son rêve. Je le défends. Puis j'ai pas arrêté de le défendre. Sauf que là, 5 ans plus tard, Chris, il est pas encore mort! Il meurt pas, le petit tabarnak! Moi, je le défendais comme un cave et lui, il meurt pas. Moi, je te défends, toi, tu crèves, câlisse! Asti de 100 ans! Puis Il est pas tuable. Je l'ai vu l'été passé à Bromont, glissade d'eau, j'ai essayé de le noyer. Pas capable. Pas capable. Je suis allé voir sur Internet, c'est quoi sa maladie? Tu sais quoi qu'il a? Il est laid, esti.
It's worth mentioning that this bit was removed from the TV version of the special. To hear it, you had to buy a DVD, watch it in cinema, or buy a ticket to one of Mike's shows. All these things are age restricted. Jeremy's parents filed a complaint to Quebec Human Rights and Youth Rights Commission. They argued that comedian's remarks caused bullying of Jeremy in school, which consequently led to depression and had a disastrous impact on the whole family. Commission referred the matter to the Human Rights Tribunal of Quebec. They wanted 80,000 Canadian dollars in compensation. Finally, a fine was set at $42,000, 35 for Jeremy and 7 for his mother. But Ward filed an appeal to Canadian Supreme Court. The trial took almost a decade and was commented upon in all sorts of media outlets. It came to an end on 29th of October 2021 when Supreme Court agreed with the comedian. It was a split decision. 5 judges wanted to acquit Ward, 4 were in favor of Gabriel family. In the ruling you can read: you have to answer 2 questions. First, whether a reasonable person, aware of the context and circumstances, would view Mr. Ward's words as inciting to vilify or to detest humanity of Mr. Gabriel. Second, is it shown that a reasonable person would view those words as likely to lead to discriminatory treatment of Mr. Gabriel. In our opinion, the comments made by Mr. Ward meet neither of those requirements. I found especially interesting something that Mike's lawyer, Julius Gray, said.
I think, in fact, it could be argued that Mike Ward provided equality for Jeremy by treating him the same as the other.
Oh, come on. Don't go that far.
I will leave judgment to you. But the case is far from over. Both Jeremy and his mother once again sued Ward, this time in civil court. And this time they want almost $400,000 combined. The rights of people with disabilities are also at the center of another case. This is David Suarez, comedian from Spain. If I'm not mistaken, stand-up comedy isn't his forte. He excels in interviews, panel shows, internet series and so on. In 2019, Twitter was at the root of his problems, or rather, one tweet. If you don't speak Spanish, let me help you out. The other day, I received the best blowjob of my life. The secret was that the girl used a lot of drool. I knew there has to be some advantage to the Down syndrome. I liked this joke so much that David made his way to this video, but Madrid's prosecutor's office and Spanish Committee of Representatives of People with Disabilities were less enthusiastic. In front of District Court of Spanish capital, they demanded a year and 10 months of prison for the comedian, as well as €3,000 penalty and 5 years ban on Twitter. The prosecution argued that this was a hate crime, and that the intention of the joke was to humiliate and demean people with Down syndrome and to perpetuate negative stereotypes and stigma connected to the condition. And finally, that it showed contempt for this whole group. Suarez responded that he didn't want to attack nobody and that his intention was to merely make his audience laugh. About 90% of his material can be described as dark humor, and people with Down syndrome appear in only 2 or 3 jokes out of over 10,000 that he wrote during his career. He assured that he is willing to apologize to anybody that felt offended by his tweet. Before the court gave out sentence, David was fired from his radio job and some of his live shows were cancelled. By the way, almost all news pages that I've shown you cited an unabridged and uncensored version of the tweet in its entirety, so I guess that it wasn't harmful enough to not print it. On 23rd of December 2021, the court ruled that the joke was in extremely bad taste, but did not transcend the boundaries of the free expression, did not incite hatred toward any group and can be viewed, and I see this for the first time but I really like this line of defense, that it can be viewed as a work of fiction. You have to know how to distinguish bad taste from what is a crime, added the judge and dismissed the claim against Suarez. And the tweet? It's still on David's profile. Okay, we will end our journey right where we started. In '63, Lenny Bruce came back to New York. With him came to the East Coast news about his trials. District Attorney of Manhattan, Frank Hogan, and Archbishop Francis Spellman have started their own investigation in comedian's case. It came to fruition during 2 shows at Cafe Al Go-Go in Greenwich Village. On the last day of March 64, among the audience was licensed inspector and ex-CIA agent Herbert Ruhe. He sat at the table in the second row and made notes of parts of the comedian's act. The next day, district attorney sent to the club 4 policemen in street clothes and recording device. Their mission? Get on tape the whole show. The quality of the recording was atrocious. Some parts were incomprehensible. Nevertheless, the transcript was made and used as main evidence in an upcoming trial. 2 days later, Bruce and the owner of the club, Howard Salomon, were publicly arrested before another show. Arrest was based in New York State Penal Code, which prohibited obscene, indecent, immoral, and impure drum, play, exhibition, and entertainment, which would tend to the corruption of morals of youth and others. Possible sentence? Up to 3 years in prison. The trial began in June of '64 and aroused great interest in the public. New York's intellectuals and people of culture, under the leadership of famous poet Allen Ginsberg, issued a petition against Bruce's arrest and in defense of free speech. It was signed by over 80 people, including Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, Bob Dylan, Susan Sontag, and Woody Allen. Lenny was represented by Ephraim London, the country's leading specialist in free speech law that won 9 such cases in Supreme Court. During the hearings previously mentioned, inspector/ex-CIA agent read pieces of his notes in front of judge and jury, of course without proper context or Bruce's delivery. This guy is bombing and I'm going to jail for it. I'm going to be judged by his bad timing, his ego, his garbled language. He doesn't miss a dirty word, he doesn't get too much of a rest. All he says are dirty words. His act is obscene. The comedian cried out to his defense team. He also denied that he ever simulated masturbation with the microphone on stage. Among witnesses and experts of the defense team was quite conservative journalist and literary critic Dorothy Kilgallen, that assured court of artistic value of Lenny's performance and compared him to writers and playwrights such as Tennessee Williams that also used vulgar language in his works. There was also minister of Presbyterian Church, which, by the way, was the only expert that was actually present on the show in question. His name was Forrest Johnson. He explained, and this part is a little surreal to me, that the term motherfucker is not in contradiction with the commandment honor your father and your mother. On the prosecutor's side, one of the most important witnesses was sociologist Ernest van de Haag, that described Bruce's material as verbal diarrhea. The defense dismissed his ability to evaluate modern culture when he admitted that the last time he was in a nightclub was 20 years ago. On the church side, there was Minister Dan Potter, executive director of the Protestant Council. He assured that Bruce would be accepted only on the psychiatric wards, because only there people are screaming random, often vulgar things. Bruce himself did not testify, but only because his defense team begged him not to. It took 99 days to announce the verdict. During this time, Lenny managed to fire his whole team of lawyers and decided to represent himself. He begged the judge to reopen the case because he had new evidence. At the end of the last hearing, judge asked the comedian if he had anything to add. His answer took over an hour. He ended with a plea to the judge himself and asked him to watch one of his shows at least once. Bruce was sentenced to 4 months in the workhouse, but was released on bail for the time of appeal. He couldn't work because clubs were too scared to hire him. Nobody wanted to end up in court. The bills from lawyers and legal fees were piling up. He went bankrupt. Lenny has never seen an end of his appeal trial. He died on 3rd of August 1966 due to a morphine overdose. He was 40. And almost 40 years later, in 2003, thanks to a movement backed up by Robin Williams and Penn Jillette among others, Governor of State of New York, George Pataki, exonerated him posthumously. Each of the cases that I've shown you today deserve to be discussed in greater detail, but that wouldn't fit in this already long-ass video. And there is even more. Like the greatly controversial French comedian Dieudonné that has dozens of court cases under his belt, including those for anti-Semitism and condoning terrorism. In Egypt, comedian Shady Abu Zaid spent 2 years in prison without a trial. In Brazil, Danilo Gentili was sentenced to over a year in prison for a joke about a state woman. Or Zarganar, comedian and activist from Myanmar, former Burma, who was in prison with a combined sentence of 59 years before he was released due to amnesty for political prisoners. There are lots of these type cases around the world. And I know that I asked lots of questions today and didn't really give many answers, but I have a couple more for you. In what direction should your society head? Do we learn from lessons from United States from almost half a century ago? Or we should be more similar to religious states or Putin's Russia? Should law protect some groups from being butt of a joke? Which groups? Religious ones? Children? People with disabilities? Who should decide that? And do any authorities should take any interest in jokes? Thank you so much for your time. Once again, thanks to Szymska Baciński and Agata Janicka for Russian translation and to Ravi Kumar for Hindi one. Those are, as far as I know, the only translations of these jokes and bits on the internet. You won't find it anywhere else. And that's all from me today. My name is Krzysztof Sawczuk and this was Stand Up Teka.